I'm not even going to try to come up with a clever intro here because this week's game comes from a particular publisher that we're very familiar with here at What Happened, and I'm just so tired. This is like the 8th or the 9th and a half time I've done this, and it's all because of one little yellow and blue logo that won't let me stop! Seriously though, I have a lot of respect for Capcom for all the wonderful franchises they've given us over the last 30-some years. Unfortunately though, to have lasted for 30 years, well, you need to churn out a lot of sequels, and just by the law of averages, a lot of those sequels tend to lose their way. And few Capcom properties lost their way harder and more constantly than the Blue Bomber, and in this particular instance, his distant cousin slash son slash whatever from the future, Mega Man X. To be honest, I long stopped paying attention to the franchise after X4, which was the peak for me as a fan, because it was the only one that contained... I mean, the regular Mega Man series kind of burned itself out with derivative sequels, so it's natural that the same would befall X. Therefore, I'm not 100% sure where the franchise went after its PlayStation debut, so let's take a quick jaunt through the information superhighway to find out that, oh no. What happened? Well, it all starts with X6, really. After a lot of really similar sequels getting pumped out almost yearly, it's safe to say that the Mega Man team at Capcom were running out of steam. Among all the 2D games in the franchise, X6 is often pegged as the weakest. While North American and European numbers from that era are hard to pinpoint, in Japan, sales were dipping with every new entry, with X5 having topped out at around 215,000 copies, whereas X6 barely crawled over the 100k mark. Those numbers, however, were still healthy enough to spur Capcom to greenlight more sequels, try to act surprised. And while not even close to what Resident Evil was selling, it was clear that X6 was made fast and cheap, so it didn't need to be a blockbuster. One other potential reason as to why there was a downtrend in interest was that X6 released at the end of 2001, more than a year into the PlayStation 2's life, which was taking the world by storm. The Mega Man X series was still sticking to its 2D roots, so it probably looked archaic to the eyes of new fans and the press. Oh, how they would come to regret that perception. This dip in sales was enough to cause Capcom to change course. It was time to bring X into the 22nd century, or the 21st century. It was time for him, Zero, and the rest of the Maverick Hunters to go 3D. Now, unlike some other series we've covered in the past, like Castlevania and Bubsy, Capcom had already seen success transitioning to 3D. Hell, there were already 2 highly regarded Mega Man Legends games, so things were looking up. But this is also where things were looking down, because some behind-the-scenes changes were happening at the company, as the shepherd of the Mega Man franchise, Keiji Inafune, had stepped away from the X series. See, X5 was the last one he worked on in any serious capacity, as he wanted to focus on other projects. Now, bit of backstory real quick. X5 also happened to be the one where Zero gets killed off, which was at Inafune's behest. But in spite of that, the fiery-haired Maverick Hunter was going to be returning.
Whether he wants to or not.
I'd always planned to make Zero come back to life in the Mega Man Zero series, but then X6 comes out sooner from another division, and Zero comes back to life in that, and I'm like, what's this? Now my story for Zero doesn't make any sense. Zero has been brought back to life 2 times.
Well, this has become a real pain. I want a full explanation when this is all over.
Capcom were restructuring all their internal teams, something I covered pretty heavily on the Flophouse files. And it was this new studio that the keys to the ride armor were given. Unfortunately, Production Studio 3 just couldn't get it together, as the titles they were pumping out leading to the release of X7 weren't exactly things you'd want on your resume. They did have some staff that worked on X5 and X6, but after the shakeup, the titles coming from the team were a bit Dino Stalker, Procast Sports Fishing, the GameCube classic Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse, and finally a PS2 version of Dino Crisis 3 that was cancelled, which is fucked. I swear every time I talk about a Capcom game on this show, it makes me realize I'll eventually have to talk about another Capcom game on this show. You can probably already see where this is heading. The studio was obviously a little on the wobbly side. They were working with a very established and well-loved franchise, and the series' long-standing producer was moving on to other things. So it's no surprise that I'm writing this very episode of what happened right now about this game.
What the heck has happened? They really made a mess.
With Inafune's departure, some of the producing duties were handed over to Tatsuya Kiribayashi, who had just been promoted as part of his move to Studio 3. He was previously a programmer on the aforementioned GameCube smash hit Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey. Now, during the start of X7's development, Inafune was consulted on one thing and one thing only: the design for the new character Axel, the Poochie of the Mega Man X universe.
Maybe what I did was wrong, but we were a perfect team, don't you think? When we kicked that big dude's butt, I thought, yeah!
Axel was the first of many changes the team wanted to make, and for whatever reason, one of those was to push X further into the background, despite his name being the only one on the box. The storyline justification for this was that X retired from the whole maverick hunting jazz into more of a support role, and thus a cooler, younger, and louder hero was positioned as the main protag in his stead.
So, where's X been lately? I haven't seen him around.
Now, if you think I'm kidding about Axel being created simply to be the cooler, younger hero, well, here's this quote from Kitabayashi where he says that Axel was created because they wanted a cooler, younger hero. He's young, he's running away, he's like the new, younger character of the group, and that's why I wanted to put him in there. Axel comes equipped with a weapon, not an arm cannon, but a gun. It doesn't shoot lemons, it's just a gun. I guess Production Studio 3 felt that
the gun is good. That gun is good.
Zero, back from not being dead, is the second playable hero, and both can be swapped in or out during the course of a stage. This was all done to freshen up the series. New console, new perspective, new gameplay systems, new hero. That makes sense given the rut that the games had found themselves in, but it's never the smartest move to lock the title hero behind a fetch quest. If you collect/save 64 of 128 Reploid hostages throughout the game, then X finally gets added to your team. I mean, why not just have that be Zero? Makes a bit more sense. Why X? Look, his face is right front and center on the box! Anyway, those big changes continued with a befuddling mix of 2.5D stages and 3D stages that were clearly designed by a madman. They also happen to be the cause of the lion's share of ire that X7 has earned. This was all due perhaps to the team's inexperience with fully 3D games, or a hesitation to move the X series into that new scary dimension. But regardless, the choice was made to anchor the camera at an awkward angle, almost as if it was being shot from ceiling-mounted security cams. This would result in many enemies enemies and hazards popping up at the top of the screen at the last second, making rooms harder to react to when compared to the 2D bits. The game also instituted an auto-targeting system that neither targeted nor did it automatically. Well, I mean, it did, but it actually just did it way too much. If you're squaring up against one enemy, then it's fine, but the introduction of multiple enemies attacking all at once in the crazy world of 3D space would make it near impossible to shoot what you wanted.
Why must Reploids fight one another? I've had enough violence.
Things didn't improve when controlling Zero, who can only attack via his Z-Saber, which requires him to get much closer than the other two. I mean, it's nice that the experience is equally miserable for everyone, but I don't have a way to finish that sentence. Zero's playstyle always kinda worked well enough in 2D, but when placed in a 3D environment, just... nah. A lot of these issues and design decisions might have been alleviated given enough polish and iteration, but as luck would have it, the team on X7 got a bit too ambitious, spending a lot of time on other stuff that didn't quite work out. In a 2003 interview, another producer who had worked on the X series before, Tatsuya Minami, confirmed that they were working on something that the X universe hadn't ever attempted before: multiplayer. With the inclusion of so many other characters in the game, we decided to make it possible for two people to play at once. Capcom even advertised the multiplayer in press materials, meaning it was definitely going to be a full-fledged planned feature, but for reasons I wasn't quite able to nail down, it was cut or deleted. Now, typically, multiplayer modes from this era were usually things tacked on in the latter half of development. Oh, we have some time to slap this together, so why not? But the fact that this was eventually axed probably meant they simply didn't have enough time to get it to work smoothly, and considering the rest of the game...
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's entirely possible that figuring out the headache that is the third dimension and the multiplayer thing resulted in less time given to designing the Mavericks that Zero, X, and the other guy had to hunt down. While Mega Man veterans probably know them well enough, for the casuals out there, do you remember Vanishing Gungaru, Ride Borsky, Wind Crowrang, Splash Warfly, Snipe Anteator, Tornado Tunyon, an actual onion, Soldier Stone Kong, and Flame Hyenard. Do you remember Flame Hyenard? Well, let me refresh your memory.
Back to the ground! Back to the ground! Back to the ground! Back to the ground!
We also can't forget the extremely forgettable Red, the Sigma stand-in. What is he? Well, he's just Sigma. Again, as if that's not bad enough, perhaps due to pressure to get the game done to capitalize on the PS2's booming popularity, X7 was notoriously buggy. It was plagued with a lot of tiny but annoying gameplay issues that resulted in a less than ideal experience. I mean, aside from all the clunky 3D stuff. These bugs included, but were not limited to, incorrect crushing damage applied to the collision of certain harmless walls, which would kill X0 or the other guy just by brushing up against them. The whole aspect of powering up your trio was fundamentally broken. Since you only get X roughly 70% into the game, Zero and the other guy would be ludicrously unbalanced with the power-ups they had gained up to that point. Power-ups that can't swap between the three, leading X to feel weak right off the bat. He is, however, supposed to take less damage than Zero due to his armor, but sometimes when you swap between the two mid-level, the game still thinks you're Zero, so X takes the same amount of damage even though he shouldn't, and then there's many other things. So, taking into account all those many things, is it really a surprise that X7 is one of the worst reviewed console Mega Man titles ever, I think? Outside of DOS ports, of course. In its review, IGN stated, pretty fairly I feel, we can't help but think that Mega Man X7 would have been better suited staying 2D, but until Capcom realizes that the better action-orientated 3D titles allow you to manipulate the camera wholeheartedly, future installments of the series will likely run into the same problems that this one did. Many websites and magazines also took the time to dump on the game's voice acting, which to me is a Mega Man staple, a banner to which the community always rallied under.
Me and Zero make a great team, and together we could take care of Red Alert.
Are you mad? You have no business as a hunter.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fine to me. The underlying feeling was that the 3D sections were so bad that they single-handedly brought down the entire experience. So don't be shocked that Capcom took quick action to course correct.
Phew. Somebody please tell me I'm through with the worst of it.
Despite the critical beatdown in Japan, the game actually sold slightly better than X6, no doubt bolstered by the franchise's first appearance on the PS2 and it going 3D, well, it kind of going 3D. So despite that small increase in sales, shortly after X7's release, the keys were yanked from Production Studio 3 and handed to Production Studio 1, who around that time were making games like Resident Evil Outbreak, Monster Hunter, and Beautiful Joe, so yeah, slightly more stable hands. Even with X8 stripping out a lot of the 3D elements, focusing more on a 2.5D style and smoothing out the experience overall, it was still met with a degree of apathy. It had a really similar graphical style to X7, a lot of the same characters, story, and since it was released just a little over 1 year later, it wasn't really on a lot of fans' radars. So critically, it fared better, with many reviewers noting the improvements, but sales-wise, it was a massive plunge. Lifetime Japanese numbers wound up being in the neighborhood of 35,000 copies, a 69% drop. Nice. This was probably due to a lot of factors: the negative reception left over from X7, the fatigue from constant sequels, and just a lot of other genres and franchises giving gamers things that Mega Man wasn't really offering. This is one of those classic tales of a classic franchise going through those first fumbling steps towards change, and it just didn't work out in the end. Capcom's priorities were drastically pivoting. Fighting games and Mega Man were getting less and less care and attention, whereas bigger cinematic action titles like Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, and Onimusha were the ones getting all the funding, time, and experienced staff. It was the wrong place with the wrong team at the wrong time, and it's really just as simple as that. Nowadays, well, outside of some appearances in fighting games and, Tekken, I guess, 8 was the last time we saw X-Zero and the entire 22nd century in a brand new game. Unless you count crossover, which I don't, and I never will. If you're aware of any other massively mismanaged mega muck-ups, let me know in the comments below, take a slow-motion minecart ride over to my Twitter, or enter through the boss gates of the Flophouse VIP Patreon to nominate the subject of a future episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.